Hello, I'm Jade and welcome back to episode 5 of Training the Commander. In my last video, we discussed some of the key fundamentals of raiding. If you haven't had a chance to watch that one, you can follow the link in the description. In this episode, I'll show you how I personally like to break down an encounter that I'm trying to train. So here we are. We've established what our objectives are, what it means to be a commander. Also, we've gone over the different learning styles you'll encounter and the key fundamentals that each raider should know. We can now jump in and start breaking down the encounter step by step. There are several questions I ask myself before training an encounter to help determine the most effective approach to take. Does this encounter have multiple phases? Does it have a hard or a soft enrage timer? Are there any wipe mechanics? Does this encounter have specialty roles such as tanking or kiting? Is this a condi or a power preferred encounter? What are the core mechanics that affect the entire squad directly? How are these mechanics telegraphed? And lastly, can this encounter be realistically cleared in one session by a new group? All of these questions help me to organize how I'll introduce each trainee to the encounter without overwhelming them, but at the same time being thorough. Let's explore some answers, okay? Let's take a look at the first one. Does this encounter have multiple phases? This is a very important one to know because I usually break down my explanations into phases. If the encounter has phases, then I will take a look at the core mechanics that we will see in the first phase and focus on those in my brief explanation. Usually, raids will present mechanics that will persist throughout the entire encounter, only adding new mechanics on top of those as the phase progresses. So it's important to make sure you spend a great deal of time making sure that your trainees can deal with the initial mechanics consistently first, and once you feel like the group is feeling pretty comfortable, then you'll be easily able to layer on the following mechanics without worrying about people failing the fundamentals. Next up, does it have an enrage timer? Is it a hard or a soft one? The answer to this question will determine the pace of my training. Most encounters give you plenty of time to kill even with very low DPS compositions. However, there are some common pug strategies that require some pretty strict DPS checks. As a commander, you will decide based on your knowledge of the group whether you will train them to hit those DPS checks or if you'll instead teach them a strat that is more suitable for them overall. I like to use these opportunities to encourage my groups to branch out and try to improve their own performances if needed. What are the wipe mechanics? Whenever an encounter presents a wipe mechanic, I make sure to stress this to everyone so that if they randomly die, they know exactly why. During my opening explanation, I'll make sure to touch on any wipe mechanics along with other core mechanics they may encounter. Now this next one is a big one. Does this encounter have specialty roles such as tanking or kiting? Ideally, you should approach each new encounter with the no weapon training technique whenever possible. In some cases where fights need to have several specialty roles covered from the beginning to end, it can make it very difficult to pull this approach off. So if this encounter has any roles like that, having an experienced raider with you to take on those roles while the trainees work on mastering the basics of the encounter can help a lot. Also, if the encounter has specialty roles, I'll oftentimes be sure to let the trainees know that this training will be split into 2 different sessions so that we can take plenty of time in the first session to allow several trainees to practice each role. This one is a huge payoff in the long run and is key to developing strong raiders that can multi-role in the future. Is this a condi or a power preferred encounter? This one isn't as important for learning purposes, but it's definitely very helpful to know so that you can properly advise your group on what classes they can bring to this encounter. But like always, try to explain what makes this encounter favor condi over power or vice versa. I did talk a little bit about this next one in the initial question. What are the core mechanics that affect the entire squad directly? This is probably one of the most influential questions that I ask myself because it makes me focus on all the mechanics that every trainee will experience at least once. These are often the mechanics that I focus on the most since they are the ones that most trainees will struggle with at some point or another. My goal is to be able to utilize the weaponless training techniques to reinforce strong mechanic management of these core mechanics. If you are unfamiliar with the weaponless training strategy, then you can watch my previous video on adapting to different learning languages, or the video after this one that I will talk more in depth about the strategy, its benefits, its pros, its cons and whatnot, and why I like to bring it into every training session whenever I can. Let's continue with the last few questions. How are these mechanics telegraphed? Once I've identified the core mechanics of the encounter, I'll be sure to explain the tells for them. I'll be sure to point out any visual or audio cues before and throughout the encounter, so that trainees start getting conditioned to look for these cues themselves. And lastly, can this encounter realistically be cleared in one session by a new group? Some encounters that don't present much of a challenge can easily be cleared in a single session, in which case I can tailor my trainings to ensure I still give thorough coverage but still allow ample time for the group to get the kill. It's important that you only allow them to kill it if you feel confident that all the trainees have a solid understanding of the encounter. Remember that. Getting the kill should never be the primary objective in the training group. Instead, earning a boss kill should be considered a reward for mastering the mechanics. After you have applied all of these questions to your training run, you will then be able to identify a basic training strategy for your current group. Remember, not all groups or compositions are going to be the same, so this is why we focus so much on adapting to the performance of the team while allowing them room to reach their full potential by arming them with the knowledge of the encounter. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. I continue to hope that these guides are something that you are able to benefit from. If what we do in Wipe can help you focus more on the enjoyment of the game, then I already feel like I've accomplished our mission. That being said, this is only the beginning of the journey. We have so much more yet to come. The next video I post will share some incredibly useful strategies and tips that I've gathered that you can use in your own training runs. Until then, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.